Hi, this is Circe Olson-Wessner, the director of the Museum of the American Military Family in Tijeras, New Mexico, and this is our podcast, Schooling with Uncle Sam. I'm speaking to former Dodds teacher and author of a memoir about her experiences as a Dodds teacher, Carol Knych. Welcome, Carol. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did. But I go under Carol O'Donnell Knych for the writing. Sometimes it's placed under O'Donnell.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. I'm excited about the show today. So I first became aware of you on Facebook a couple of years ago. You had written a lovely piece about a woman named Lily Flores, which I had hoped to include in our Schooling with Uncle Sam anthology. Who is Lily Flores and why is she so special to you?
Well, Lily Flores was really indicative of the wonderful quality of people we got in Dodds. She was the daughter of a Baptist minister and joined the Army, I think in the 50s, I don't know, and got her education through them and then came to teach for Dodds. And she was just original. She'd dye her hair different colors to keep the kids engaged. She had been an art teacher for a while. And she was very strict and very direct. And my son came home and told me something she said to a little third grader. And I said, that's really a bit much. I'll get you out of that class. He said, no, mother, we love that woman. She cares about us. She wants every one of us to learn, and she won't leave anybody behind. And I thought, for a third grader to get that and say he loved her. So I went to a party and I saw her and I told her that story. And she said, that's right. I'm going to get every one of them through the third grade. So they're reading and writing if I have to pull them by the nape of the neck, And we had so many people that really went that extra mile for kids. And I think part of it was that Dodds attracts adventurous, gutsy people. And we had so many fine teachers in that group that it's no wonder to me that we test well compared to other schools. We've got a special group. And I think, we didn't make a lot of money, but we went interesting places. And to have an obituary that says they lived here or they did this didn't seem adequate to me. So I've written several obituaries to expand what was said in the newspaper, because on Facebook it's free. And the people who know them, I get notes back saying, oh, I'm so glad you made Lil come alive for us because she was such a wonderful character.
Well, you just touched on what my next question was going to be. I was really moved when I read that piece, and I imagine a lot of other people were, especially ones that knew her. And you just said you got some feedback on that, but did you get feedback from strangers too? I mean, you just said that one person said you made her come alive, but did strangers also comment on your piece on Lil?
Well, I don't remember. There were people I didn't know, but I think they were from our teaching group that knew her as friends and colleagues. Mm-hmm. I really don't know if there were complete strangers or not.
Well, she was a complete stranger to me and I loved the piece. So question, why do you think it's important to write remembrances or memory pieces about people in our lives? And what is the value in reminiscing at all?
Well, I really think it's strong, of course, because I wrote a whole book, but I didn't write the book because I'm important. I did it from my point of view because that's what I have, and to not say it's my point of view wouldn't be honest. So when I started writing, I did it to go to classes with young people because I retired at 56 and I missed young people. So I would go to our junior college and I started writing essays. You had to write 3 a semester. And so I had several students in a couple of classes. And one man said to me, you've made this come alive for us. We were young and we didn't even know the Cold War happened. I did not know I was that old at that time. And he said, you reference the Kennedy era, but for us, we hear Kennedy, Kennedy, but it doesn't really mean much. Would you take your references out and write a chapter on what Kennedy meant to your generation? So I did that, and I put it in my book. And one young woman said, could I take your chapter home? Everybody had a copy. And for Thanksgiving to my grandma. So I said, certainly, I'd be happy. And she took it. She said, we had the best discussion we ever had at Thanksgiving, because my grandmother, I read some excerpts from what you said about what Kennedy meant to, like Obama, I was comparing him. Mm-hmm. And she said, my grandmother started to cry because she said her religion got her through such hard times, and that my family stopped going to church, and she's so ashamed of us because we benefited from all her prayers. And so my father said he'd take her to church, and I went with her, and I never understood what it meant. Mm-hmm. Just to go, until she explained it because of what you wrote. So I felt that was worth the whole thing, and I put it in the book.
Well, that's really cool. So shifting gears a bit, we're going to talk about your memoir now. It's called a Cold War Teacher's Tale. Can you give us a little synopsis of it, just a titch for our readers, our listeners?
Yes, I tried to give a picture of what life was like for dependents. I didn't say much about our heroes except in their role as fathers. But because so many military stories are just about the men, but there's a big support system out there, and there are a lot of sacrifices made by the military families, and they are so marvelous. They just rise to the occasion. They set a good example. They get a lot out of what they do, many of them. And when I found kids with mothers who were too scared to come out of the apartments, I'd invite them to go with us on field trips. And then they could see that their child could speak a little German or whatever we were teaching. And then the mothers would feel more comfortable about going away from post, which was kind of my goal. I wanted them all to see where they were, not just the post. So I thought that if I described what that life was like, that anybody from any of our schools could see the commonality. They didn't have to be from Würzburg, Germany. They could be, I've gotten notes from people who are stationed all over the world, Japan and France, and saying, oh, when you talked about being on the economy and how you related to people. And usually if I send them a book, they write me back a note about their stories, and they're really charming. I've just loved them. And you don't have to be famous to really take in the history of your time. You are part of it, it's around you, and your take on it may be very unique. So I don't think people have to say, I'm not famous enough to record what I did, because you're also recording the bigger picture.
Well, that's very interesting, because our museum has always said that in order to understand history, you need to see it from all sides. And our museum is telling the story of the family, the military family, not the service member, as you just alluded to beautifully. So how did you hear about Dodds, and when you signed on the dotted line to teach for the school system, did you think you'd spend 33 years doing that?
I thought 2 years, because that was the original commitment. But I went from Michigan to Seattle, and I was from a town of 2,000 people, and I went through Michigan State, and my family was very protective of me. I was the third of 5 children, and they were so protective that I knew I couldn't grow up if I stayed too near them. I was really good at eliciting help. And they would help me. And I thought, Carol, if you want to grow up, you've got to leave home. So I went to Seattle to teach. But in the 50s, it was very hard for single women, because if you didn't have an escort, you really didn't go out in the evening, and you didn't do things if you didn't have somebody to do them with. So I was stuck home quite a bit. I didn't know people in the Seattle area. And then I heard Kennedy's don't, what can you do for your country speech.
Mhm.
And just after that, I saw an announcement that the Dodds was having people come to interview people in Seattle. And I took a day off work and I went in and interviewed. And I thought 2 years, and I thought I could see more with the little money teachers have and get around Europe if I was living there. So I thought that was a good thing to do. And when I got there, you had such friendships among teachers, and everybody was adventurous, and everybody would bring back, if we saw something, like we were in Germany and the farmers were doing sugar beets and covering them with dirt. My husband, who I just knew as a colleague at that time, he would stop and try to talk to the farmers, and he speaks Polish, not German. So we'd have these great conversations with the hands and the feet and pointing and and then take big pictures and we blow them up and put them in our classroom. And we'd say to kids, this is how America was 100 years ago, which was really true.
Mhm.
And it just teaching so much fun because you could bring what you saw every weekend back to children, and they were aware and lively and fun. So that made it good.
So where all did you live and teach in those 33 years? And which one was your favorite and why?
Well, we started at bedtime. That's where I met my husband, and that's where Elvis Presley had been. And we got married at the end of the first school year, and we went to Bootsbach. And Bootsbach is the little town they use for GI Blues. And so they were very American friendly because the Americans had brought in a lot of money. And Elvis was very nice to Germans. He was very polite and very kind, and they really appreciated him. So we had such warmth from the people surrounding us. And if you'd go out and you couldn't speak right, then somebody would step forward and help you. They'd hang back until they saw that you were hanging yourself, and then they'd step forward and help you. And they were just so kind that I come from a German community in Michigan, German farmers. And my father said, now you forget about all those atrocity stories from the war. We killed most of their bad guys. And the ones we didn't kill know enough to keep their mouths shut. They'll be good to you. They're good German people here. They're good German people there. And you let them know that you'll give them a chance. And that was always the case. When you give people a chance and you treat them with respect, they will respond with warmth and just tell you extra things when you're at a monument and stop you on the street and say, where were you headed? I think you're going the wrong way. That kind of stuff.
Well, yeah. So you lived in Bootsbach and Bad Nauheim. Where are those the only two places, or?
Oh, no, we were in Holland for 1 year near the Air Force Base. My husband taught there when I had 2 babies. And then we went to the States for 2 years and we're very homesick for Europe because we'd had such, our marriage started there. And so when my husband got his master's in counseling and guidance, they offered us Würzburg, Germany, or Washington State. And he said, you've got the choice. And I said, let's go back to Germany. We didn't know Würzburg at that time, but it's a marvelous, marvelous city. Mm-hmm. The theme of that city is where man has time to live. And it's a beautiful town with flowers all around and walking areas. And it's just a marvelous place to raise your children, museums and churches, and it's pretty central. You can go many places. So it was a wonderful place to be.
So you've already said this a bit, but many brats and teachers believe that Dodds provides the greatest education for kids, especially compared to stateside public schools. And you mentioned the teachers and the adventurous teachers. What else do you think makes the DoD school system so good?
Well, they're integrated, and you've got kids with all kinds of different backgrounds, and a lot of the mothers were foreign born. And so you've got this extra awareness of the world that you wouldn't have in Morenci, Michigan. It just isn't there. They were all white middle class farmers where I came from. And to get these kids, I asked kids to write a paper. I was always trying to get them to write. And I said, write a paper about your being in a secret place that nobody knew you were there, and you overhear them talking about you, and they're saying good things, because seventh graders always think nobody says good things about them. So I was trying to do that. And two of them wrote about being in a park in Korea, and it was the same park. And they were both very quiet kids. They had never really connected. And when the one read their paper out loud about being in this hiding place in this park they could go to, they said, I know that park. My mother was from near there. And they got together and they got their mothers together. And it was just a marvelous thing to see happen.
That is so cool. So you again, you kind of touched on it, but were there more obvious differences between stateside schools and in the DoD schools that you recognize as a classroom teacher teaching?
Yes, the discipline. You always had the military backup. And if you called home and a child had told some stories about you because they thought, you might be calling, and they wanted to discredit you. And I called one home when a girl had changed an F to an A in my grade book. And of course I recognized that very quickly. And I called the home and I got the father, and he said, we know all about you. You're prejudiced against Judy's mother. And I said, I don't think I ever met Judy's mother. Yes, but you don't like her because she's Oriental. And I said, oh, well, I wasn't aware of that, but can we discuss why I'm calling, and then we'll talk about that. And so I described how she changed the grade in my grade book, and that she'd done two, her own and a friend's. And because I always left my grade book on my desk. And he said, oh, I see what's going on here. He said, this will never happen again, and you will get an apology in the morning. And I did.
Wow. Yeah.
But that's how dopey seventh graders are,
Well, that is this parental involvement is a huge theme when we talk to other former DoD teachers too. So and we just did an interview with Mr. Brady, who mentioned that the parents are just head and shoulders above.
Yeah.
Mr. Brady, as you know, DoDEA, that's what Dodds is called now, has just celebrated 75 years. You spent 33 years in the system. My mom and dad and I spent quite a bit of time. If you were to imagine the next 75 years of DoDEA based on history and current world events, just imagine, what would you think the school system might look like in 75 years?
Well, whatever develops over those 75 years, I think Dodds would be cutting edge, because we had computers before other schools ever did. They wanted their graduates familiar with the equipment, because a lot of them would join the military, and they wanted them to have that background. So I think whatever develops over these next 75 years, the Dodds, because the teachers who come in are open to change. Just because they came, they show that they're open. And so it isn't like you're from the hometown school and somebody says, I taught this lesson 30 years ago and I'm going to teach it the same way again because it worked then. You have people that are willing to change and take on the new ideas. And so I think that it would evolve to be top notch, whatever it is.
I agree. I'm still waiting for somebody to say there's going to be a school on Mars, but nobody has said that yet. But we'll see. So I know you've written at least one other book, a novel. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about it?
Well, when I talk to anybody who writes, I give them 2 copies of my books, the Cold War book and Polish Inspiration, because the seed for Polish inspiration is in the Cold War book. When there's a chapter about going behind the communist lines. My husband's Polish American, and we found that from 1971 we could get visas and we could drive into Poland. And so we did drive in about 15 times. So we had such strong impressions of that, and it was evolving. Just when we went in, it was like 100 years behind times. And by the last time we went for a wedding in 1994, they had refrigerator cars, like units for a wedding, and they had the cakes that they made for this wedding on shelves in the refrigerator car. I mean, it was just such a jump in technology and availability and awareness that my husband said I couldn't put his family in our book, but I kind of snuck them in anyway. So I made up a novel. It's got a plot, but it also goes to that family farm, and it's a very good description of their family farm and the interactions. So if anybody's interested in Eastern European life and descriptions of Poland, and also how it is to go back and try to help somebody without disrupting their lives, that's a real big issue. Right. Because we were teachers. $100 was the most we ever had to give away when we went in. And we had that because my husband's mother sent it to us. And we get $101 bills, and a $1 bill was a man's wages. So when you gave it away, we were just drunk from being rich.
Yeah.
And my son, who now manages money, was 12, and he said, "Mother, you two have to answer me straight," because we make up stuff to be funny. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Are we rich or are we poor?" Because we always had to save for the summer. You know, we'd had to be tight. And we had 5 children. And Bob said to him, "Michael, for Americans, we're middle class. We're educated. We have good jobs. We know we have a salary coming. So we're middle class. But here, we're like the rich uncle, because we come in from outside and we have money. But we're not really rich. We just play rich for the times we visit. And so we've got to be careful with our money, but we really know that we have the whole American government behind us, and that makes us rich. If we got into trouble, we could call an embassy, and not many people of other countries have that privilege. And so we are very privileged people, even though we don't have much money in our pockets. So.
Wow, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So I'm thinking, and I know you must have done this. Did you have to do additional research? I mean, memories are one thing, you know, you remember an incident, but did you have to do historical research, additional research? And what was your process when you wrote both the novel and the teaching memoir?
I wrote it and then I checked it to make sure that my memory coincided with real history. And my brother was a diplomat, and he was stationed in Berlin in 1965 to 67. So, and he is a big reader of nonfiction. He's much better informed than I ever was. And he was retired here in Tucson. So when I finished a factual chapter, I would have him go by it. And he was on the internet with his diplomat retired friends, and so he would copy a paragraph and they would vet it for me. I mean, that was a privilege, you know.
That's awesome. Subject matter experts. Yeah.
Yes, I really did double check things, because the memory isn't that accurate at times. And especially as I get older, there are memories that mish. They kind of push together. So you've got a correct memory, but you might say something happened when you lived at this place, but it happened when you lived in that place, you know. And so you need that correcting person to help.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You know, we talked about Kennedy and the feedback you got from writing a little bit more about Kennedy in your book. What other historic events or memories did you then put into context to help your reader understand, just besides the Kennedy years?
Well, my husband took my son on the train to, I think it was where the Olympics were when the Palestinians took over. Right. And they were there the day before that happened. And so when they came home and we saw it on the news, we were just transfixed to watch that. And I was trying to write that. And then Gore had this TV program that he sponsored, different programs for a while before he sold it. And there was a documentary on that incident. And I just happened to see it while I was writing about that incident. So I'm there taking notes while I'm watching the film on it. And it was talking about German police being on the roof over the apartment where they had all these people. But the TV was showing it, and the people in the apartment were watching it. And so they knew that the police were on their roof. And they came out with the submachine guns and said, "You get away." And that ruined it because they had that information that they should not have had. And that was really sad. And then they showed the film of the night when they were getting the hostages out and trying to go to a bus to get to a plane, or I don't know what it was. And so I was taking notes about that. Well, I wouldn't have remembered that all accurately. There was no way I would have remembered it, but I saw it on that film.
So how do you?
So I included it.
Yeah. So how do you weave that into your memory then, so that it you know, because it's not your memory, but it's the fact. So how do you weave it into your story?
Well, I think if I remember correctly, it was the point of view that I used. I didn't know how to do that to start with. I was writing memories just as you would write your memory.
Right.
And then I read Teacher Man by the fellow who wrote Angela's Ashes. And his point of view spoke to me. And because most teachers, if you talk to somebody who's going to tell you something, they come across as, "This is the way you do it." And I have never been that kind of person. I'm a struggler. I'm a figure out as you go, or I'm a listening to somebody else who has more experience. And I was always mining my colleagues for suggestions and things that would work, because I never felt that I had reached my potential. And so when you're trying to write, the tricky part is to get the voice and to get the transitions. And it's all about transitions. How do I go from my opinion or my memory to the history of it? And I think I do it in several different ways in the writing. I might just say, "Later I read," and put down what I read. Or I might say, "Someone told me at a later time." There was a part about Kennedy that he always thought that Hanukkah was being used by the Russians to bother us. And 50 years later, it comes out that Hanukkah was wagging the Russians. He was putting the wall up. He was causing problems. And we never, with all our spies and all our information, we didn't get that. I mean, our government didn't understand that. And it took 50 years later for that to come out. And I think I put that in, that you can not only be misled, you can really have honest, decent opinions that are wrong because your information is wrong. And so when I had political discussions with my friends, which were about half and half, Republican and Democrat, we're very polite. We've agreed we want to discuss things, we want to have our say, but we have to listen to the other fella, and that fella better be polite about it. So we do that. And
Wow.
that's how you work it in. You learn things, or you get it later, and you don't want to go ta 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 ta. I'm going to interrupt the story to tell you this, but
Right.
occasionally you have to, and it has to be short and quick and to the point.
Very good. And I appreciate the way you and your friends carry on with political conversations. What would you tell people who are on the fence about writing a memoir or starting a blog? A lot of people want to do it, but they don't know how to start or if they even should.
Well, I think too many people are saying to themselves, am I worthy? Will somebody say I'm an egotist? It's not about ego, it's about history. And it's about the different points of view. And there's some marvelous books out there about what happened, like diaries of people who were in Berlin when it was bombed, and different places. And they weren't political people, they were people affected. And I would say to anybody, hesitate. You don't have to be famous, and you don't have to have death and mayhem on your doorstep to have an interesting story to tell, because you are a person who lived through historic times, and that's what gives you validity. And if somebody says, oh, I wouldn't read that, it's not important enough, then they shouldn't read it. But you should record it, because your point of view may be rare and it may be different. When I was taking classes, I took 22 classes at Pima Community College just to be with young people. And I would go in when there was a presidential speech or something, and I'd come in late because I was listening to it, and I'd walk in and they're all there, and I'd say to the teacher, I'm really sorry I'm late, but I was listening to this presidential thing. And I said, what are you people doing sitting here? You're young, you should be hearing this. You shouldn't be in class, you're living history, you come late. It's up to you to follow your government and your times and learn about it, because I'm done. It won't affect me much, but it's going to affect you, and you better wake up. And I said to the teacher, I want you to assign them to write about how they feel about politics today. And if they don't have opinion, we should all shame them.
Wow.
Because
you were not a popular student with that teacher telling her how to run her class.
oh, I was the oldest person in the classroom, and they treated me very well. And she'd laugh. But I said to them, you should write down today what you're thinking today, and you put it in with your passports or your important papers. And every 10 years, you should be writing that and show how your thinking develops over your lifetime, because you may not want to admit in 20 years that you thought what you do think today, because you've learned more and you've matured. And you need to be honest with yourself, because that's the only way we'll have a democratic government, is if people are honest and they develop and don't just stick to one opinion somebody gave them in the 6th grade and they never change. You need to be changing and looking and saying, are the things I feel strongly about valid? And are they justifiable? And if not, what's going to make you change them?
Wow.
The
All
teachers
right.
like me.
So shifting perspectives here, have you ever made a literary pilgrimage? Where did you go? Or if you haven't made a literary pilgrimage, where would you like to go?
Well, I never have. It just never occurred to me. I have some writers I really liked, but not enough to. I think I understand that you write and you come from your environment, but you really live on the pages more than in that house sometimes. So I've never really been compelled to go. I met Isaac Asimov at a writers conference and I've written up notes on that, and William Lederer, who wrote The Ugly American. And he went over my first novel with me and helped teach me the difference between showing and telling, which I did not get. I was 35 years old and I didn't really understand how to set up a scene. And he walked me through it. And when I'd go off, he'd say, "You're doing it again, stop that." And so I would be real interested in seeing where Lederer was from, because he was a Navy captain and he wrote a lot about being in the Navy and things he learned as he became, I think, I can't remember, but he was pretty high up, but a very decent man.
Well, cool. So in the last few minutes that we have left, what would you like us to know about you or your work? And then also, where can they buy your books?
Well, they can go to Amazon. It's under Amazon Books, both of my books, and I'm in 2 anthologies. But the thing is, it's not in bookstores because Amazon doesn't give the bookstores a good enough cut, and it doesn't matter how good the book is. If you go into a bookstore, they will order it for you and get it for you, but they won't stock it. So you have to get on the computer, or you have to go to the bookstore and ask them to order it. And it's A Cold War Teacher's Tale is the first, the one about being with the military schools. And the second one is Polish Inspiration, about an American family going into Poland to give away an elderly uncle's life savings and to help them, but they want to invest it because they're afraid to give them too much money that they'd lose it, So they want an investment, and that becomes very complicated and fun.
Well, I will put the links below as well in the comments underneath our podcast so that people can just click and go. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I mean, we could spend all day, but
well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
The lawn mower people are outside, and of course, I'm sure Zoom is picking up that as well. So we better wrap it up. This has been a lovely conversation. This is great. Hopefully, this will spark some interest in your work. You've given some really valuable writing tips as well.
Oh, may I add one thing? Yeah. The Cold War Teacher's Tale, I hired an actress to do an audio book, and it is available as an audio book.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yes.
Also on Amazon?
Yes, and I didn't have that available for 3 years until I met a woman who does audio books, and she explained to me how easily it was done, and it was done economically. I paid the actress for 9 hours of work, which is what they told me it would take, and the book people, the audio book people. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have to. They can make their money by getting half of your income from it. But I was not sure that many people would order the audio books, and I didn't want to take advantage of a professional. So I paid her for her time, but it wasn't bad. So
that's interesting. I did not know that. That's very cool. So again, we have been speaking to give us your full name so people can look you up. Carol.
Yes.
O'Donnell.
Carol O'Donnell Knych. My maiden name was O'Donnell. My last name with Bob is Knych. He was responsible for all our trips around. He really is the adventurer. And I'm the backup person with the notepad. And I never kept diaries, but if we took a trip, I had a notebook for each child, and I'd say to them, "Tell me what you saw today that was interesting." And then they'd tell me something they noticed, and I would write it down in their book. So I went through all those when I was writing. So I had all my letters home to my mother that she kept in a box for 30 years. I wouldn't have remembered everything I put in. And I started writing as a factual thing, and I took it to these classes, and they wouldn't understand because they didn't know military and all that. And they'd ask me a question, and I would answer with a story, and they'd say, "Put the story in, it makes it better." So that's how the story, became expanded by story after story so that I could express what we went through to people who didn't have our background.
Well, and I think that might be another tip for budding writers out there. Keep journals, keep letters. If you're mailing letters to people or emailing, keep your emails so that you have reference points later on. I know that some of my friends who are writers and my father, and even I have kept journals, and we do go back to refer to those diaries, those journals, those letters. I have stacks of letters that my parents wrote to my grandparents who saved them, and they are wonderful to read. So all you writers out there, keep all your letters and emails and journals and all
they are valuable beyond money. It's not about money. It's really about experience and having a meaningful life. If you've done things that are meaningful, don't be too modest.
Well, there you go. We're going to end on that. And I wanted to let our listeners know that the Schooling with Uncle Sam podcast is supported in part by New Mexico Arts, the New Mexico Humanities Council, Sandia Area Credit Union, and organizations like Military Brats Seal and Military Brats Registry. And once again, we've been speaking with Carol O'Donnell Knych, and it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your joining us today.
Well, thank you so much. This is the first time I'll have to learn how to listen to podcasts.
Well, I'll send you the link when we get it done, but thank you so much.
Wonderful. I would appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate this. Thank you very much.